seems like we are alive, and sounds good. All right, so thanks everybody for joining today. My name is Livia Kalossaka. I'm the UK country representative of YES. And YES, as some of you may know, is a European network of young leaders in energy and sustainability. And I have from my team as well, Mara.
Hi, my name is Mara. My background is in art and philosophy, and I'm part of the YES Europe UK team.
Yes, and we are going to have today three people joining us. We have Ed, who is the CEO of Hydrocotton. Then we have Ryan, he's the CEO of Putipley. And we have lastly joining us Arib Mate as well. He's a PhD at the University of Cambridge. So I'll hand over to Ed to present himself.
Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I'll just talk through quickly what we do. So I'm one of the co-founders at Hydrocotton, and we're helping fashion brands reduce their environmental impact by growing what we say is radically more sustainable premium cotton in a transparent way. So cotton represents 25% of all global textiles. It's an absolutely huge global market, but sadly has the dubious reputation of being one of the world's thirstiest and dirtiest crops. But it really doesn't have to be that way. We've developed a simple two-part solution for developing world cotton farmers, split into a turnkey farming system and app-based farm management platform, which allows our farms to grow cotton with 0 pesticides, up to 80% reduction in water usage against numerous global baselines, as well as a 2 to 4 times increase in yield, so saving huge amounts of land. And the way that we grow increases the fiber quality regardless of region. So we're currently talking to scale our trials and move from the lab to the field, looking particularly at South Asia and East Africa.
Wow, sounds quite exciting and look very promising. So we look forward to hearing more about Hydrocotton during the talk. And I'm gonna now leave Ryan to present himself. I'm quickly gonna share the screen because he has a slide as well to share with us. And let's go with this.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm Ryan Mariassen, founder of Putiply. And as you heard from Ed, like the fashion industry is one of the world's largest polluters, and we're coming at it from an angle of trying to tackle it by focusing on a very niche user group, which is children, and designing clothes from them that grow multiple sizes to reduce consumption in that sense. But we are a wearable technology company, and what we're essentially doing is building a large multidisciplinary team where we can approach different problems within the industry and come up with solutions that can be implemented in a very short amount of time and that have a very positive impact through a solution that hasn't really been thought of. So here is a solution that was designed essentially to be as desirable, commercially viable, and ethical and sustainable as possible in a small amount of time. Thank you.
Looks actually quite interesting. I think I saw Putiply design once in a show here in London at the Dyson School, and I was amazed when I saw it. So quite nice because it's kind of a nice concept that you don't really see very often around. Actually, I think as you're saying, you're trying to patent it, right? So it's very innovative. And lastly, we would like to present Arib. So what we're trying to do in this talk show is as well trying to get people from the public to give a chance to members of our network as well as non-members to be part of this expert talks. And Arib is actually a PhD at the University of Cambridge. But it was recently featured on the homepage of Cambridge, actually, for an interview he had about how he's trying to merge his passion for fashion together with science. So, yeah. It's quite
So I'm currently doing a PhD in chemistry at Cambridge, and I'm trying to basically merge my interest in fashion with my interest with science. So I just wanted to combine the two worlds essentially, and just break stereotypes that currently exist in both industries regarding following a set path in either fashion or science.
Yes. Yeah, and he's trying to launch his own, let's say, YouTube channel and all of it. So we'll probably put a link at the end so you can see how he's trying to put these two passions together. All right, I think Mara, would you like to start the debate?
Yeah, I'll happily do that. Okay, so our last talk, which was also our first one, was on the topic of behavioral change. So we just wanted to begin by linking a bit to our last discussion. So sustainability in regards to fashion is an incredibly complex and multifaceted issue. There's the question of how are the clothes produced, by whom, with what, and where do they end up, which also feeds into questions of ethics. So we would like to hear a bit about how your brand navigates this complexity, all whilst satisfying customer demand as well.
Yeah, I could jump in there.
Great.
What we're trying to do is the entire value chain and design something that can have a positive benefit for everyone along that value chain. That way you can make something that is commercially viable. So like it can actually sustain itself in the world and not be funded just through grants and charitable causes, but it can be a business that can run, self-sustain itself. Sorry, it says my connection is unstable. I hope it's okay and you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear.
What we're trying to do is essentially use. You can hear a bit. I'm just gonna pass the baton onto someone else and quickly swap my internet connection. That helps.
All right, sounds good.
So I can just take over on that side. Obviously, we're working on the farming end of the fashion supply chain, which is not the side of fashion that I think most people are used to analyzing or even think about on a day-to-day basis. Like I mentioned earlier, a quarter of all the textiles in the world are made from cotton, which you can imagine results in a huge amount of farmers being involved. It actually covers 2.5% of all agricultural land. And I think that one key lever that we can bring to consumers in terms of shifting attitudes towards the products that we consume is by making this crucial yet very conveniently and often ignored part of the supply chain much more visible. And with the advent of better communication technologies, better data platforms, so we see lots of projects tracking materials using blockchain, there's a real opportunity for us to kind of lift the curtain and get better information on all aspects of the supply chain.
Okay, so do you think that basically it's more of the industries that should push for being more sustainable, or do you feel that there is actually a lot of consumers demand for that as well?
So I think a lot of the research at the moment is pointing to the fact, I can only really talk for European markets, that consumers, I'm talking to researchers, I'm aware. So when you ask them what they want, wholeheartedly, I think most demographics will say they want more sustainable and ethically sourced materials. Problem is that what we say and what we spend our money on is not always the same thing, but it definitely seems like there is a change happening in the industry and that people are starting to embrace some of the ideals of sustainable fashion.
Yeah, and there is actually something quite recent. Actually, I was chatting to Arib one of these days about it. It's Arib, maybe you can help me here. Selfridges, right? It's opening. It's trying to do something new with its business as well.
Yeah, so basically, Selfridges have offered like the service where you can rent out clothes. So basically, you just sign up for the service, and then you're able to rent out clothes and repurpose them for other like uses. And I think they've also opened a pop-up store recently from Prada, and Prada have basically developed these items of clothing or like shoes, which are made from purely recycled materials. So it's a more sustainable movement in luxury fashion, I would say.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think I was reading a bit about Putipley, and Ryan, you're stating on your website as well that you're using PET bottles for your textiles, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we're using recycled bottles to manufacture the garments. The manufacturing process is much more streamlined as well, because we're making 1, not 7 different sizes. And then as a result, we have to transport 1, not 7 amount of items.
Yeah.
And that has positive impact on logistics, the amount of CO2 emissions, as well as the bottom line of the company, which is also very important. I think we also have a very low return rate compared to competitors. The reason being that people buy multiple sizes and then they return the sizes that don't fit. So this is what I meant when I was answering earlier about taking more of a holistic view over the entire value chain and trying to, when you enter, understanding the repercussions of your actions upstream and downstream, and ensuring that you've thought about everything essentially. So yeah, and I think in terms of nudging behavior, so in terms of your earlier question, I think what we're trying to do is really inspire and educate the next generation, and show them that like sustainability and innovation can live hand in hand, and it can be actually quite a magical experience, and one that can offer something which traditional garments can't offer, because the delight of a child seeing a magical garment expand open is so much more powerful than for a child anyway, than maybe using an alternative material in that case.
Yeah, and how, for instance, now that I would say you're not a well-established business, but you're growing and you actually have customers and all of that, how are you managing the supply chain? So how is it easy to find these recycled PET bottles? Like, how have you managed to get a constant supply of it?
Yeah, it's getting much easier. The way we're doing it right now is relying on high standards of certifications. So there are certifying bodies which certify certain suppliers. So that's how that's the closest method that we can manage to do at the moment. But I think as we grow, we'll sort of take on a little bit more independence in that role, as we have more money to spend on really vetting supply chains ourselves. Right now, we're able to vet our manufacturing process very well because they're based in Portugal. So it's very easy for us to go there as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's a bit where perhaps Hydrocotton and Putipley complement each other, right? Hydrocotton is more high in the value chain, and I was just wondering, you're both startups, you're just getting out there. How is it easy to get that link? Imagine that Hydrocotton, you want to basically go to the next part, to the kind of sell your cotton, and then let's say if Putipley was supposedly one of your buyers, is there like a platform where you can meet? How is that happening? What's like the framework in this industry?
Sure. It's
I'll add.
it might be very different conversations, but I think it's definitely more opaque than I would have hoped beginning. And I think that the number of fashion accelerator programs that are starting to appear are trying to address this need to connect innovators and researchers to larger industry, because these companies are absolutely massive and have been operating on incredible volumes of material, which is how they can serve the needs of everyone on the planet. And it's not always the easiest door to kind of knock down on. So it's definitely been a bit of a journey, but I think it's one of those worlds where once you start making your first connections, it's definitely easier, but you have to break through the looking glass, I might say.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm just imagining, like let's say here, I could imagine we have Arib that could be one of the potential end users, and then we have Putipley that could be actually who's selling the clothes, and then Ed with Hydrocotton, if Putipley was using other materials than PET, you could be one of the suppliers of the raw materials. How do small businesses, how can you basically get out there? How could, a potential Arab in the world like find you and stuff like that? I imagine it's more of social networks? How important is that?
Yeah, I think social networks play a huge role in forming that. The most sort of traditional way of going out and finding suppliers, the easiest and highest return on investment from a small company perspective, is going to these large kind of like fabric festivals where you have lots of suppliers from all over the world who are there, and they are it happens twice a year, and they show their collections and things like that. But and it's when you go to that you realize how huge and actually how wasteful the industry really is, because you see face to face all of these more established suppliers.
Yeah, and like in your vision, like, do you envisage that you could use? I mean, the design behind Putipley is, I mean, is quite innovative, right? You're using these auxetic forms, and I was wondering, I'm more of I'm a chemist as well by background, but I'm here in the Department of Design Engineering at Imperial College, and I was wondering, can you use other materials? Like, how flexible are you with you know, to merge the design and the material? Like, can you find easily fabric that could be used for your design, or are you limited?
We're somewhat limited, so we can't use any material whatsoever. We have to use materials where we can essentially embed more of a memory within the yarn. Okay. But we do have some flexibility with that. So that's basically what we develop in-house and try and work on to ensure that we can maintain a product which is also really durable in terms of fatigue cycles and so on.
Yeah, and in general, like I would say, you know, one of the big brands out there is, you know, for instance, Patagonia, and they always say actually, you know, if one of your purchased items was damaged, they would repair for it. Do you offer as well this type of service, or are you envisaging in the future to do such a thing?
Yeah, we do offer it, but we don't publicly say it. Whenever anyone has a problem, we just take it in and we fix it. And through that, we're kind of beta testing how we could sustainably have that model within the company. Because I think having a model like that would actually benefit us by a huge amount, because we'd be able to see sort of where the pain points are in the design, and then start using that in the design process to design that out as much as possible to then increase the durability. So I only see an advantage of having some sort of repair model like that. And so, yeah, it's something that we're quite excited to be developing.
Yeah, no, sounds, I mean, I imagine, you know, it's more in the future plans you're.
Yeah, it's because I think part of that reason is because you need like a sort of critical mass to have a certain amount of repairs every month that you know that you need to be doing. Whereas if you're just doing it ad hoc, like once every now and then with a smaller customer base, I think it's much more difficult to sustainably scale that kind of a model.
Yeah, and just a question, I think it's for all of you. I know that you're all working on innovation, either from, you know, a business perspective or a technical perspective. How much have you taken like into account during this innovation the end user? Have you done a lot of tests with the end users? Because, you know, you basically have innovation, but then at the end you want this innovation to be actually used, right? So how did that go?
So for us, we were testing from day one, whether it was short, medium, and long-term tests. Short tests being testing the aesthetic and the material qualities, the hand feel, seeing what was working and what wasn't. Medium tests just being a couple of days long, where we test it in customers' hands and have an idea of how they were using it over 2 or 3 days. And then we had long-term testing, which was 1 to 2 months. So that was with the real MVPs, which had lots of different problems with them, etc. But through that, we were able to gather such a huge variety of feedback in such a small amount of time. And then after that, when we were able to actually source the supply chain, etc., we were able to make 100 garments. which we called the BT units, and they were production ready. They were really good in terms of a finished product. But we made these 100. We sold them around the world to different cultures, different climates, to try and understand how that sort of influenced the design. And we were able to gather feedback around 6 to 9 months later, take into consideration that feedback, collate it, make a final design iteration, which was the final production ready sort of design. And then in return for their feedback, we gave them a free second version of the garment. So they really had a strong incentive to give critical feedback, which was actually helpful feedback. So it's been super important in our early stage growth.
Yeah, and you've managed to incentivize them somehow as well. So
yeah, I think it's important. It's important to remember that I mean, we're not businesses, we're not charities, we're businesses, and so people need incentives to want to help out. Even if you're trying to create something for positive impact, there's still you still need to make something which is desirable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's quite interesting because the users, in a sense, are quite different from our end, where we're looking at stakeholders. Our direct users would ostensibly be people like mills, yarn spinners, and farming groups and farmers themselves. So the initial insight for Hydrocotton drew from seeing farming systems, working in startups designing new farming systems in sub-Saharan Africa for arid regions, and looking at the kind of the mismatch or the disconnect sometimes in designing with a mindset of automation and replacing whole subsets of labor forces, and realizing that the application of technology done human-centrically for different ecosystems and economies basically will be what allows us to scale new agricultural technologies in regions which are primarily smallholder. So just to get rid of some of the jargon, I think in the West, we promoted a form of agriculture based on the Green Revolution, which predicated itself on extremely efficient, large operations that cover hundreds of hectares with vast monocropping farm systems. This has been popularized the world over, but it doesn't quite reflect regions where they still rely on smallholder agriculture. So drawing on my background in human-centered design and running behavior change research last year at Imperial, which is how I met you, Livia, bringing those ideas to developing new farm systems to augment farmers rather than replace them. And we'll be running those prototypes next year in our trials.
And I imagine, is there a lot of like reskilling as well that is needed on the farming side, or
on the what side? Sorry.
On the farmers, right? You're working with them very closely. I imagine, reskilling the workforce.
Yeah, so that's going to be, I mean, it's going to be designing the platforms the way that they interact with the systems. So I think we're used to the idea of human-centered design for app design, but this is bringing human-centered design to farming systems.
Yeah. Okay, I like now to just shift to a bit more of your experience so far. So I imagine that as yes, we're a young network, and I can imagine some of the viewers could basically be in your position where you were a few years ago. And I was wondering, you were working on these concepts. How, when did you know that you had something in hand that you wanted to actually grow this into a startup? Was there like a revelation moment when you said, we have it, or how did it work? I'm just curious to know what was the process like.
For me, it was I think not wanting to create a university portfolio piece to then go out and get a job. I wanted to create a project which conceptually could self-sustain in the real world and could be not just theoretical or a design concept, but it was something that could be real. So from the very beginning of the project, I had no idea what the outcome would be, just that I wanted to create something that was more ethical and more sustainable within the fashion sector, so within the wearable sector. And I just sort of went for that.
Okay. Ed, any views on that as well?
Yeah, I don't know if what's it called, a switch flipped particularly, but I was working across a few different industries after I graduated. I think I found it really difficult after leaving university. I couldn't really, without sounding elitist or snobby, I didn't find companies that were particularly large companies or medium-sized ones which were totally aligned with what I wanted to do. And I started having ideas around sustainability and was lucky enough to be surrounded by people who were in the realm of sustainable fashion, sustainable agriculture, and slowly started having ideas. And I think like many designers or engineers started testing them. And from very early on, just getting sense checking with different stakeholders. So when you're building a prototype, you don't need to just make sure that it works. Does it grow the plants? But talking to people in the industry, is the industry ready for this new technology? Who are the end users? And that kind of, every time I got some positive feedback and could work it into the idea, then that kind of gave me more and more momentum. And then suddenly you kind of find yourself ready to go full time and really just attach yourself to the idea and try and make it as much of a success as possible.
So it was quite a journey then. And I'm wondering, like, I know that you're both UK based. I mean, Ryan, you said you have production in Portugal, but I'm sure you've, I imagine you started off in the UK. Do you have any programs, any accelerators that you would recommend for, for people that want to start a business to go to, or any, networks, groups? I'm just trying, to, at the end, we want to network as much as possible. So just wondering.
So we just identified whatever was the most useful for us. In the first stages of growing the business, we were part of Innovation RCA, which gave us more of a sort of general overview of how to start a company. It doesn't matter what sort of industry you're coming from. As we progressed, we applied to more specific accelerators, such as the Center for Fashion Enterprise, which gave us more fashion-focused insights. We were also a part of Makerversity. We're part of the London Business Accelerator as well, I think it's called. And yeah, so I can provide a few more after, but we've essentially tried to just identify the best types of support programs for whatever stage that we are at. And I think that that's quite important in understanding, because what I've learned from experience is that you can potentially apply to something too early or a little bit too late, where you won't have as much as a positive impact that the program can offer you as possible. And so you do actually want to time it in a way that it can really support your business and not just go after everything that's out there.
Okay, yeah, that would be great if you could share at the end later on some.
Yeah, a list.
Would be nice.
No problem.
I have a question for Ryan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In terms of your product, like the material, you mentioned that it grows as people like grow. Does it shrink also? Like, can it be reversed? Yes.
Yeah. So it can be reversed, because essentially what we want it to do is also be passed on from sibling to sibling.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually can't wait until it's in a more of a hand-me-down sort of world. We've seen a couple sell on eBay and maintain their value, which is also really important sort of research and insights into how people, again, perceive the value of the garment and see it as more of an expensive item, something that retains its value. I think that's very important. But yeah, to answer your question simply, it does go back.
Cool, thanks.
I think Ed was trying to say something before.
Really boring answer. I really echo what Ryan says. You've got to look at the different platforms that are available and just really make sure that it's suitable at the current stage that you're at, because different accelerators and incubators will offer things like primarily networking, which could be very critical if you're looking for pilots or supply chain partners. or actually, yeah, the fundamentals in business. I guess one group that's been really, really helpful to us has been the Imperial Enterprise Lab, which is obviously more relevant to Imperial College students, but they've been incredibly helpful. One of the first groups that we engaged with, but I can add to that list as well.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think it's important as well, because I was reading this report. I can share it as well at the end. I will put it in the link on the video. But basically they were saying that in fashion, there's basically soft tech solutions. So it could be like digital platforms. And then you have the hard tech, which is like raw materials or, basically new technologies. And they were saying that there is the opportunity it's in both, but it's much easier to fund the soft tech solutions rather than these hard tech. And but those are at the end are the ones that could actually radically transform the industry. So I was wondering, after the initial stage, in order to advance in the commercialization stage, perhaps if you're currently experiencing such difficulties, or how you're managing to go through that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Sorry to jump in, Ryan, but obviously farming systems rely on quite large amounts of hardware, space, people to kind of grow cotton at volume. So that's definitely something that's been quite unique to what we're doing from a small stage startup, and then figuring out how you quickly scale up, because you're not going to have an impact unless you're at a scale which allows you to kind of at least change the direction of an industry, or actually make an absolute change to, I guess for cotton, it would be the amount of water or land that it uses. So it's definitely, hard tech is a bit more of an interesting space. And a lot of the investment community, which kind of exploded in Silicon Valley, predicated itself on digital technologies. So we are seeing a shift there, and it's definitely an interesting place to be, because there's lots of new spaces for investment. You have to link your accelerators to the right investors and make sure you're talking to the right people.
Yeah, definitely. That's very important to keep the communication quite clear and ongoing.
And I just think that both soft and hard will have a lot of room for improvement. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to identify it in one than the other. But as long as you, as a designer or an entrepreneur, align your skills and have a great amount of focus of what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you're going to do it, and I think then you can truly achieve it. Because I mean, at the beginning, it was very difficult for an engineer to sort of start going into the fashion industry and say, yeah, I'm gonna create these clothes that grow with children. And there were many naysayers at the beginning, but now we're at a stage where we've passed most of that.
Yeah, and well done for managing that as well, and exactly breaking doors, basically, as you said. I think it's something also Rib was mentioning in his interview. For a scientist, could kind of step out of his comfort zone and go into a new space. I think there is a lot of potential there for both sides, right? To innovate at that point.
Yeah, like how do you know when to stop doing R&D and stop doing product development and then go straight into commercialization? Like, how do you know when to stop doing your product development?
I guess you don't know. I mean, we're constantly developing our product even right now. You know, we're receiving feedback and we log it all, and then we start working on how to improve that. It's just the point at, I think for us, it was the point at when can we authentically and genuinely sell something. And if you sell something, that's the point of commercialization.
Yeah.
Up until then, you can't really charge people for like a really faulty product, unless it's a beta product and they understand that they're part of the process. Then that's a different thing. And I guess that is a hybrid of a commercialization and a research phase. So I think maybe building that into your product launch is actually the best way, because it's not like a on-off. It's not like overnight you become commercial. It's actually a staged thing, and there's a phase of a beta essentially.
Yeah, but there's always areas to improve your product development, right?
Forever, yeah. Otherwise you'll never maintain your position at the top of the game. You know, you'll other people will learn from you, and they will improve what you have done and surpass you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like to say that we've already been half an hour, more than half an hour through the talk, so I'll start wrapping up. I'd like, if possible, for you to kind of think about the future of fashion and sustainability. Like if you were to project yourself like in 10, 20 years, where do you see, you know, for all of you, where do you see fashion and sustainability going? Do you have like a vision, or do you see your business somewhere?
I'll let Ed go first.
During one of the most hardcore periods of uncertainty that I think, well, us growing up, but in quite a few generations, that's a really, really tough question. Yeah. From a business perspective, our ultimate ambition is to be able to scale not just cotton systems, but into explore other natural materials and diversify the approach according to the different environments under which these materials are produced. So I'll say a pretty easy get out of jail free, but I hope for an industry that's a bit more resilient through the diversity of approaches. So where one region can rely on a certain farming system or a certain type of factory to derive materials, I would hope that people start making things that are more contextually appropriate, and that we kind of relinquish this need to have incredible homogeneity in the supply chain. Because I think that ultimately leads to these radically damaging systems, because they're applied all over the world. That's a very vague philosophical answer, but that's something we'll need, is that diversity in how we procure materials.
And yeah, and all we want to do is continue to design for human needs, and not release products that add to the waste that's out there, and actually somehow benefit an individual's life or a society's lives. And so our aim is to clothe the future of humanity, and we say that we're just starting with the next generation. And it's really about taking that approach, which I think is similar to Ed and his company. It's just a different strategy, a different way, a different material.
Yeah, and I don't know if Rib or Mara want to add something from perhaps an end user point of view, if you know there is something they'd like to see changing in the industry, or you would like something to happen perhaps.
Yeah, no, I'm just been thinking that I've seen recently the vintage market in fashion is becoming much more popular, and that ties into the, I think, Putipley's brand ethic, like the hand-me-down products. So I think that's what I've noticed over the past like several years, is that market is growing rapidly, and I think that's where it's moving towards in the future.
Yeah, fingers crossed it'll continue to grow, and that the stuff that's designed today will be durable enough to last
many years,
further cycles. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Could you put just a question like that out of the blue, Ryan? Could you potentially once you've let's say your child is using your clothing, you're passing it to his siblings, potentially I'm sure you could pass it on to further networks, but can you recycle it at the end? Is there any chance you can do that?
Yeah, so right now we're designing the versatile garments that we have to be made from a monofiber construction. So they only contain one type of fiber. The reason being that obviously like a polycotton or other blends are much more energy intensive to separate the fibers. So it's much more economically viable to recycle these garments. And so that is something that we, again, want to do. So we're designing that for now, even though we don't have the facilities to process it now. But in 5-6 years, when we are at a position where we can perhaps take back the objects that we've put out in the world, we'll be able to efficiently recycle them because we've already thought about that design point now.
Yeah. So early on, thinking throughout the design. And Ed, as well, I think at the beginning you mentioned something about your fibers having superior quality, or something about them being kind of superior in a certain aspect.
Well, yeah, it's I guess superiority, it depends on the purpose, but cotton grows to different lengths of fiber. So when you pull it apart, it actually has a single fiber will have a particular length. And you'll also see the uniformity across the plant bringing certain ramifications on the processing of the material. So in order to, this is more about addressing the economics at the bottom end of the supply chain, but it's looking at growing higher value crops so that they ultimately bring higher profitability to the fields under which they're grown. So we're looking at high value cotton staples as we see a market shift towards higher, more premium quality materials that we believe we can address. And these are the little things that you start accumulating as you shift fully into fashion, understanding those material requirements, basically.
Yeah. Any final questions from Arima, or if we have any from the audience as well?
I have a quick question. We mentioned briefly, although we didn't need to mention it, that we're kind of living through a moment of crisis at the moment. I'd be curious to know if you've noticed any impact that this has had on sustainability and consciousness in terms of sustainability amongst consumers and customers, and whether you see that as, is it a hopeful time? What do you see happening next?
I think at the beginning, many people were starting to, people's behavior has definitely shifted quite drastically in the last few months. We've seen infrastructure in cities changing quite rapidly, where you now have many more cycle lanes, you have many more cyclists, and this is all beneficial. There's obviously the other end of that, where there are many more disposable items, which are going to landfill or worse. So there's been some positive shift and there's been some negative. I don't know the impact of the two right now because I don't think there's enough research about that. For us as a business, we were forced to really sort of address our market and see how we could sustain ourselves. I think that the benefit of Putipley is that it's one size that fits all. So it actually worked quite well for people who didn't want to go to shops or obviously couldn't go to the shops, so they could buy something that could definitely fit. They were starting to make decisions more for the long term as well. So they were starting to think more about the benefits of Putipley in particular, how that spreads over 7 years and 7 sizes, and how that has actually a drastic impact, and it's a better quality garment than what they'd buy 7 times of another garment. So suddenly our product made more sense in this world. And in addition to that, we also came together as a team and designed these Putipley masks, which are designed to fit multiple faces because the structure can sort of grow around the contours of the face. And so suddenly we were addressing another problem which was arising, which was the disposable surgical masks, which many people were buying and didn't necessarily need to unless they were in more of like a high R rate zone, such as hospitals and so on. So I think it allowed us to develop a new product and address a new need, which we had no idea was going to come about 6 months ago. So massive impact.
That's a pretty positive impact to a rather negative situation, I would say.
Yeah, silver linings.
Yeah. And Ed?
So I guess for us, we had, I think I can only really talk about the conversations we're having with industry. And I think there was a moment where a lot of companies almost shut down and had some serious internal reflections, which is totally understandable, as all the high streets closed and no one was buying any, certain product categories saw a sharp drop in sales across different parts of the fashion industry. What we're seeing now, though, is we're seeing a lot more people seriously engaging with sustainability. So a lot of market trend reports from companies like McKinsey saying that sustainability will be a key differentiator to win over customers as we go forward. And we've also seen a few more scandals, unfortunately, in the UK around poor labor conditions, to put it mildly, up in Leicester. And I think people are being, the information is coming through thick and fast, and that there's broader awareness amongst all tiers of consumers that we need to change the way that we buy. So I'm hoping that converts into more adoption of sustainable initiatives.
Yeah, the labor issue is a long and complicated one. I think we will need a complete different, kind of talk to go into that. So we'll probably leave it for another time. But I'd like to thank all of our viewers and more than anything, the speakers. So thanks again to Ed from Hydrocotton, Arib from Cambridge, and Ryan from Putipley. And speak to you very soon. Have a good evening, afternoon.